Chapter 11, Layer and Object Properties. Hi, Joe Cerrone. We're going to take a look at Chapter 11 from our AutoCAD instructor textbook. Our learning objectives are to understand the strategy of grouping related geometries with layers, being able to create layers, color, line type, line weights for layers, being able to work with properties of the layers like visibility settings of on, off, freeze, thaw, lock, be able to manipulate layers, work with line type scaling to adjust the line types, look at some of the concepts and properties, being able to look at, again, line types, properties of layers, and layer tools within AutoCAD. Layers is really a big part of how AutoCAD and CAD works. As we work with layers, what the concepts are is they're like transparencies. And so as we work with these different objects, your engineers and your interior designers will all have different roles. And so as you look at this drawing here, you've got plumbing fixtures for a bathroom. And so they'll create a plumbing layer or a heating, ventilation, air conditioning layer, and then they'll put those drawing elements on those different layers. And then you can toggle those different layers on and off, and you can just see how everything lines up and how everything fits together. And so it's like having these different transparencies that you can turn on and off. And so as you start to work with these layers, we've given you drawings that already have layers included in them. So when we work on our mechanical drawings and things like that, we'll have a layer for an object line or a hidden line, etc. So as we look at these different object properties and the way that they're set up, you have different layers. And so if we look at one of our drawings, for example, in this mechanical drawing for this array, and then we were to look at our layers, we have our layer properties right here. And you can invoke the layer property manager by selecting the layer button. And you can see we have a layer 0, a 3D layer, a center layer, a define points layer, a dimension layer. And then as we look through all these different other components here, you have the ability to turn the layer on and off with these light bulbs here. And so, for example, if I turned off this blue layer called the object line by turning off the light bulb, then the object lines are removed from the drawing. And if I come back here and I turn the object layers back on, there we can see them. And then if we come back here to our layer properties manager, we can look at some of those object line properties. On and off, or freeze and thaw, when we look at these here, you can open them up a little bit by pulling that right here. The difference between on and off and freeze and thaw is that one of them regenerates the database and the other one does not. And I believe it's the freeze and thaw that will regenerate the database. And so back in years ago when AutoCAD was on lower performing computers, you would turn off layers so that it would work faster. But they essentially do pretty much the same thing right now. And then we can talk about viewport freezing and some of these other things. But essentially what you may want to do is to be able to take a look at all these different commands by expanding out the layer properties so you can kind of see what the tabs are for them. And so here's our object layer. We can turn it on and off with either of these first two, either the freeze and thaw or the on and off. If I freeze it, same thing happens. It just disappears. It just doesn't recalculate the database. If I come back here and I turn it back on, now the layer is visible. All right, continuing on. So you have the ability to turn these layers on and off, and we have the ability to work with different line types as well. So when we work with layers within our drawing, what we also want to do is to be able to have the line types associated with different things. And so we have our color. And so if I wanted to change it from blue to, let's say, purple, I could change it from blue to purple, and it's global. What happens is everything on that layer will go to this magenta layer. For now, don't worry about viewport layer coloring because you can customize this to a level that's extremely precise, but from our standpoint, we'll just make them both the same. And so now that I've changed that layer color, now it's purple. And then if I were to say, oh, let's go back to blue. Now it's back to blue. The other thing that we can change is the line types. And so the line type for this one is continuous. If I were to click on the word continuous, and we can make this a little bigger, what it will do is it'll go to the line type selection and allow me to change that line type. And different line types mean different things. And so continuous lines are used to show objects that are visible, and then hidden lines would show features that would be hidden or behind a different object. Like if you have a hole through a square box, you would use hidden lines to represent the hole in an orthographic drawing. But you can change the line types here in the layer commands, and then you'll see that the line types are now changed. And then we can come back here, put those back to continuous. And so we have these different line types set up so that we'll draw on different layers, different things. And so we'll put the dimensions on our dimension line layer. And so if we looked at the quick properties for that, we'd see that that's on the dimension line layer. And then if we were to look at, and it doesn't seem to be saying that on there, let's see. And so the layer is dim. And so you can change things in properties here as well. Same, just six of one or half a dozen of the other. But as we continue working through the chapter, a big part of working with layers is understanding line types. And so we'll use line types like center lines on the center line layer. So for example, if I turned off the center line layer, now you can see that the center lines have been removed from the drawing. And then if I turn the center line back on, now you can see the center lines. And so when we work with the properties of the layers, we want to be able to use the proper layer, set the proper color, set the proper line type, and then line weights will go through things like how thick those lines are, and we would make those according to standards. And so center lines are going to be a little bit thinner, 0.3 millimeters. And then object lines would be a little thicker, 0.5 millimeters. And again, you can change these, but we have them set up. And the idea is that by drawing different components on different layers, you'll get a look for the drawing where you can see the object lines are a little bit heavier, a little bit darker. And then the hidden lines and the center lines are a little bit lighter. You can also assign things like plot styles to the drawings so that they'll plot with different colors and different properties for that. Here it's showing again the layer properties manager. Freeze and thaw, as we talked about, being able to turn things on and off. You can create new layers by just using this little yellow sun, and then you can name that layer and create new layers. And then you can put different objects on them. You can change the colors of the layers as we demonstrated. You can change the line types of the layers and load these different line types. And there's all these different line types in the AutoCAD DWT template. And then you load them as you need them for different things that you might need to draw. Line weights, as we talked about, we have our standard title block set up with these different line weights. You can set things up so they don't plot as well. And so you can turn on and off plotting abilities within layers. And same thing with viewports. You can set up so that you have certain viewports displaying certain layers and other things that are not displaying. Grouping is somewhat of an advanced command. We really don't go so much into it in the first course. So you don't really need to read this for a lot of content, because it allows you to have layers that will then be grouped together and share common properties. But at this point in a basic AutoCAD course, that would be kind of confusing. And so we just talk a little bit about it, and then we'll go into more of that into the intermediate or to the advanced class. But you're able to go through and set up the different display settings to see different layer properties. And then they have these other commands for being able to set different layer properties, like the layer states. That you can go through and save. Again, these are advanced properties. We're not going to go too far into them. You can rename layers. You can click on them. You can right click on them. Let's say you spelled something wrong. You can right click on it and rename it. You can restore it. You can export layers to different files. There's a million different things you can do with layers. It's very powerful within AutoCAD. Here's our line type information, where you can go and set the different line types for AutoCAD within the layer properties. And so while I'm in a AutoCAD drawing, in the layer properties, here's my line types. And you can just go ahead and load these. And then you have all these different line types that you can work with. Hidden lines, dotted lines, dashed lines, center lines, gas lines, etc. And so there's a lot you can do with AutoCAD and with layers. So you can load these different line types. You can delete them. And then you can set the line weight command. So there's a line weight command that displays the drawing. And so actually, as you're in the drawing, and if you want to see the line weights, here's our line weight command. And if we go into a top view, turn off our grid, you can see how heavy the line weights look. And that's because the line weight button is enabled. You can disable it and you can see it looks very plain. And then as we add the line weights, it looks much more detailed. It's easier to read. And so if you right click on the line weights, you can go to the line weight settings, and they talk about adjusting the display for that. We really don't need to. I'm just tying it to the textbook so that you can see how to turn on and off line weights. And so that's what this area is displaying. And you can change through the units and things like that. And then as you go through, it has these different properties and things for colors. And so when we look at properties by layer or by block and things like that, we want to leave them as by layer, because you can override those and make those so that they're always one color. And so when you look at the colors and the properties, what they're talking about here in the drawing is this right here, by layer. And so as you create things, by layer means that whatever the layer color is will be the properties color, but you can override it. I can say, well, I want the color to be red. And then even though I'm on the layer 0, or if I were on the layer object, I've overrode the properties and it's going to be red. And so by having it set as by layer, it will always be whatever color the layer is. And so if I were to change the layer properties of the object to, let's say, purple, magenta, you'll notice that the one that was drawn with by layer updates, but the one that was set with an override where I just set it for red stays the same. So things like that are possible with the AutoCAD. And you can set those colors as we talked about here. And so you have these different color properties. Another really neat thing about CAD, if you go into interior design work and things like that, is you can actually set these colors to be extremely specific so that the colors will match like color books. And so when people start to render out things for interior design projects, they want the colors to match exactly, or if they're going to be working for a company that has like a specific shade of blue or green, then they'll match those properties to the color properties within the layer. Again, here's our line type scaling. And another aspect is to be able to control the line type scaling. And so as we work with line type scaling, we're able to set the scale factor for these different drawings. And so we can set up the line type scaling. And what the line type scaling will do is it will allow us to change the width of the dashes and things like that. So as you look at the scaling of the hidden lines here, or the center lines, we can change those with LT scale. We're going to leave them at 1. If we were to change them to, let's say, 10, now you can see the line weights are much bigger. And then if we go back to line type scaling, we set it to 5. Now they're a little bit finer. Set them to 2. Set them to 1. And so you're able to adjust those line type scalings so that the drawings look properly annotated with our hidden lines and our dimensions. And then properties allows you to override it. Match properties is a great command. In the match properties command, what you can do is you can select a property to clone. And so as we are working on our drawings here, and let's say I wanted to go back to blue. And if we wanted to match the properties of something, so let's say that we wanted this to be on the same color and layer as the blue line layer, what we can do is we can go to our match properties command right here, and we could say match the properties. And so if we wanted this to be our source, we could then make this clone it, and it will match those properties. And then vice versa too. We can come back here with match properties, go back to an object line. Match properties is a very powerful command. It works well with setting the properties of color, layers, and line types, also with dimension styles and things like that. Continuing. And so there's other layer tools that we can work with, being able to match layer properties, being able to move things from one layer to another. So you can make layers current. And so another option that you can do is when you're working on something and you say, oh, I've got to draw this floor plan on the same layer as the other properties are for, let's say, the furniture. Okay, when you look at that, that's on the chairs layer. And then if I wanted to work on that layer, what you can do is you can say, make that layer current. And so make layer current. And so if we click on it and then we say, make layer current, now we're currently going to work on the chairs layer. And then if we were to put more chairs in, then we would have those chairs on the chairs layer, which would be on that cyan color and in blue. And then you can lock layers. And so oftentimes what your CAD manager will do is to lock some of the layers so that people won't change things on it. And so if we come back here to a layer, let's just use a simplified drawing like this mechanical drawing. And let's say I didn't want anybody to change anything on the object line layers. What I can do is I can go into the layer for the object line and I can put on this lock. And then what will happen is it'll fade a little bit, but you're not able to then modify or change the elements on that locked layer. And so that locked layer is then just there for visual purposes, and you're not able to change it. You can unlock it, hitting the little lock, and then you can go ahead and work on it. And then some of these other commands we don't use so much, as far as there's a million different, ways to copy things from one layer to another and move things around. As we go into more advanced courses, we can take a look at some of those different aspects. And so that's basically a basic rundown on layers. We can look at some of these different chapter exercises like the floor plan drawing, and then you can look at the layers that they have and you can see how to turn on and off the layers. But ideally, the idea behind layers is that we use them like transparencies, where we can go into a drawing like this floor plan drawing, and then we can separate out the different elements that we want to see on the different layers. And then you're able to toggle these different layers on and off for things like heating, ventilation, air conditioning, furniture, etc., so that you can then work within those different elements. Alrighty, that ends this chapter lecture on drawing layers.